Let's go. So, hello.
Hey there.
Thank you for coming. So you're a doctor and a professor at the university. Who are you? What are you doing? What are you writing about? Please let me know. Introduce yourself.
Okay. But I'm not sure who I am, as is often the case. I struggle with that like so many people. My name's Jerry Laderman, and I teach in the Department of Religion at Emory University in America. And I have been teaching there for a long time, about 30 years. Uh, and yeah, I don't know. So the classes that I teach include sacred drugs, religion and sexuality, entertaining religion, and death and dying. And I've read a few books. So some books, a couple books on death, and I just have a new book out that just came out recently that is based on that class, Sacred Drugs, and it's called Sacred Drugs. So that's kind of where my intellectual life is at the moment.
That sounds very unique, not really standard. I teach about math, or I teach about human psychology or sociology. So that is very interesting. What originally drew you to that topic?
Oh boy, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are deep psychological reasons that propelled me into this strange world trajectory. But no, I have no idea quite exactly. For sure, the topic of death has been a topic of interest for a long time. And I actually wrote about it in this little memoir that's out there called Dope to Think About Death, that tries to reconstruct some of my life and how different episodes might have led me to pursuing this topic. Um, but in terms of more conscious awareness, really became a topic of intellectual curiosity as an undergraduate. I was a psychology major and started taking religion classes as well. But I kind of knew I was going to be studying death. I just, I'm not sure why. As a 23-year-old, I was so convinced that if I was going to continue to pursue um, liberal arts studies, then, why not study what matters most? Why not study what is at the heart of so much of everything in human society the human psyche. So, early on, death kind of just drew me in. And so I suppose I would say there was an intellectual curiosity, even though I know, um, uh, like many of us, our encounters with death, our thoughts of death, kind of emerge at a very young age, and I think contribute in a lot of ways to who we are, and our psychological makeup.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I In my university life, we also read Sigmund Freud as a um, not as a psychology or a psychiatry source, but as a historical source, and he's quite thinking also about death. I think one of the first intellectual people to do so, or pseudo-intellectual, however you feel like it. And also the grief. So what happens if the person already is dead, and then how do the other people, the people who are basically left over, feel about it? So that's also, and of course, in religion, it's what mostly religion is all about, right? What happens when we're dead? So do we go to heaven, or do we go to hell? Or
Yeah. Well, all kinds of things. There are possibilities that are out there for a while.
yeah,
Yes. But certainly, that I was reading a lot of Freud. So, this was back a long, long time now, in the 80s. And, I was reading. And for the same, the love, what was interesting about Freud for me, too, was not so much the psychoanalysis and that put into practice, but more of the cultural analysis that brings psychoanalytic kind of theory and thinking into how we understand, um, larger social patterns and so on. So he certainly was key. And then, yeah, religion, exactly. This is for me too hard. Religion, other people have said it as well, but this is um, seems to make the most sense. And my perspective is, religion, religious imagination, religious aspects of human life tie into our encounter with death and how that has evolved um, with us, and, through human evolution.
Yes, of course. I'm just looking up, so I don't get this wrong. But there was this leader of people called Jim Jones with the Jonestown massacre, where they drank the poison at the Kool-Aid. What is that part of the religious thought that people are thinking themselves into or following their leader? Is that the type of cultist slash religion beliefs you study, or is it more about celebrity adoring uh figs?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's deep and complex, and not so easy to generalize, for sure. So, as you try to think about the various connections between death and a religious life, I mean, certainly Jim Jones and Jonestown is just one sensational example of how that might intersect. Um, Not necessarily unique. I mean, there's other instances, I think, through history as well, of that kind of extreme
Devotion.
behavior, devotion, and sort of giving your life in a kind of mass suicide. Uh, but the point, though, I think is relevant in thinking about, well, what do we even mean by religion? How do I think about the religious life? And how does that differ from people who are more identified as theologians or people who are more firmly within the social sciences? I have a very broad and capacious understanding of religious life that doesn't necessarily include God, but is very much focused on the sacred. And to just try to get to a point here, I will not go on a rambling lecture. No, but the point here is for me, the sacred is at the heart of so much of religious activity, religious life. But the sacred is also double-edged in my conceptualization. It is both a energy, kind of force and source for social cohesion and harmony and transcendence and love, and encounters with the divine, all kinds of wonderful things that we commonly associate with religion. But the other side that I think we have to keep in mind as we talk and explore this concept of religion is that the sacred could also be unbelievable destructive force that can lead to all kinds of carnage and demonization and extreme forms of violence that also, again, has religious elements for me. Even though, it's not all neat and tidy. It's very messy. Um, but but that's kind of one aspect of how I understand religion more generally. And then, of course, that plays out in terms of how people respond to the encounter death and move on. The meaning of that.
So, thank you very much. It's a very long and complex answer, of course. Now, going back to your work, what you wrote is a book called Rest in Peace, A Cultural History of Death and the Funeral Home in 20th Century America. So, as a German myself, when we speak about the 20th century, it's all industrialized death and horrible, gruesome crimes against humanity, and it's all horrible, and it's all. I mean, for sure, we have laws and whatnot, and it was just barrack. Overall, a lot of carnage. But so in your book, you write about where the very Americanized or American rituals from the Civil War up until the well 9/11 in the epilogue, how that shaped the American way of death, to say. And do you think it has even evolved a little bit further with the entire digitalization and access to Wi-Fi and internet, or even more access to Wi-Fi and internet and live streaming? Or did you just say, okay, I'm done. I wrote 10 years of death and then no more?
I'm not sure you can ever be done with death. Wait, okay. Well, I thought I was done with death after that first book, The Sacred Remains, which was my dissertation, and looked at the impact of the Civil War, as you said, in America on attitudes toward death and how we handle the death. Right? And so the sort of take-home point to summarize basically is the Civil War opened up the possibility for embalming to become the cornerstone of this new emerging industry, this new emerging business that was tied to funeral homes in the aftermath of the Civil War, late in the 19th and in the early part of the 20th century. So when I finished that book, I was like, I'm done. And I can't write more about that as my dissertation with a few years writing it. One of my favorite things to do in terms of the research I did for that book was to go to cemeteries. And as you may also know or feel, cemeteries can be wonderful places just to be, but also great repositories.
Yes, I live right across one. Sorry to interrupt. I live right across one. There was one general during the Leipziger, we call it Völkerschlacht. I think you call it All Nations Battle with Napoleon. It's beautiful, but it's also a very nice park, and you can have your dogs run around a little bit there. So it's very nice. But
yeah, there's something that's weird and tranquil or whatever about being in a cemetery, although, to be reactions. Anyway, but still, I was like, no way am I got into that, gotta move on, do something like on Phil, so it's like, where's it, Phil, and then move, into something a little lighter. But no, I couldn't get away from doing basically the sequel to a book that nobody read. But thought, why not finish the story and follow the line on that book. First book, Sacred Remains, ends with this, what I call the birth of the funeral industry in this early 20th century. So the second book, Rest in Peace, just continued that cultural history and looked at funeral homes and the funeral industry in American cultural history in the 20th century. So yeah, that's part of how I got to where I am. But then without question, in the other books that I've written, and this book on sacred drugs, death is absolutely essential. Again, if you're going to be talking about any kind of religious cultural activity and mentalities, I think death is relevant. It becomes relevant either explicitly or implicitly in some ways.
no, of course, that really makes sense. So what I quite don't understand, because I'm focusing about the ethics of the corpse and death, and what does like sacred, something being sacred, coming from Europe, very generalized Christian society. When something that's holy, we have the 10 Commandments, and like you shall not kill, and you shall not do other things. But when something is holy, that's more associated with the church or cemeteries or the dead themselves. They should not be be disturbed, right? And how do drugs, and I assume you mean like things that put your mind into another state of mind. How do they go together?
That's a big question. I was all answered in the book.
Well, yes. Okay, I'm gonna link the book. That's for sure. That's okay. No, no, it's good. Good.
I mean, it's a very broad understanding of the statement and religious life, so that it opens the possibility that people are religious outside of the church and outside of those conventional uh, signs of holiness or what have you. And so I try to shift the focus and look at other aspects of cultural life. Okay, things that really seem to matter most to us, where we invest so much of our energy and time, and where we draw out meaning and kind of orientation in the cosmos that really has religious implications in people's lives. So, for an example, you're thinking about drugs. I have a chapter in the book that looks at, well, I look at a lot of different drugs, and as you say, I'm mainly interested in mind-altering drugs, those drugs that we think of in terms of altering our consciousnesses. So that spectrum can be, from everything from LSD and psychedelics to the coffee we all drink.
I love coffee.
So, or cannabis, or alcohol, or tobacco. There's all kinds of, they're ubiquitous in our lives. Anyway, so one chapter looks at pharmaceuticals and the ways in which pharmaceutical industry might be understood as a religious culture. And so, one thing I try to explore that seeks to and reframe what it means to be religious in ways that we might not necessarily recognize at first glance, but just the sort of reality of taking an antidepressant every day. And that is a ritual process that brings order and stability to what would otherwise be a chaotic universe. It helps to, in many cases, establish a sense of normality and a connection with one's self or one's true self. It is seen as something that is in some ways magical, even though it does have all of the kind of scientific frame around. And it promises salvation, some degree of meaning.
Yeah, take this pill and you feel better, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, and that you can find in the mythology, if you will, the religious mythology of, I don't think you have this in Germany, but we have advertising, direct to consumer advertising, that really does help reinforce the religious resonances. Even though it's not about God or Jesus or some sacred text, it's about these things that are existentially powerful and meaningful, but that again aren't tied to a sun god or to necessarily the ancestors, but instead to this again overdetermined little fetish object that is the go. And that's not, I'm not trying to trivialize. I mean, I believe, the power of antidepressants can, regardless of how we understand the science of it, transform people's lives. So, I mean, that ties into religious kinds of sh-
Feelings.
yes.
yeah, and purposes. I mean, so when I lived in Florida, just as a side note, as an exchange student, I was placed with a Baptist family. And for me, there was a huge culture shock because they were very religious in a form that, for me, as a not practicing Protestant Lithuanian Christian, didn't know. We know old churches, old people, graves, walk across them. It's very old. And then I go to the US and I get greeted by what now I see as a cult, but for them, very normal lives. And it was very interesting, but also very challenging for me. But going into pop culture and celebrities and personality cults, um, basically pop culture and even my own podcast, it is dealing a lot with true crime media, a lot of death, and the meaning of death. It's not really dead. A person, a character in a movie, they can just reappear like the Jesus, and also horror films. Um, they're very gruesome in another form. Um, and they're not only on film, social media, and games, but they're also entrenched in our conversations and even the news when sadly people are being forcefully killed, which is sadly happening a lot. What do these representations reveal about how we think about death nowadays?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's a lot. I don't know if there's any one again easy answer.
There never is.
Never is. But you know, I mean, you're onto it because you can explore historically how representations of death have been incredibly significant in shaping the public, you know, cultural attitudes, and certainly private as well. But for my own work, I'm much more interested in social and cultural as opposed to the interior subjective aspects of all this. Uh, so I think there's no question that the representations of death that becomes part of our visual or imaginary kind of landscape can help direct people to make sense for the meaning of death. And certainly, as we think about this in terms of the West and America, and then sort of Christianity in Western Europe, you can see how that works, how the rhetoric ties into the representations that tie into um, the contours, of people's religious lives. So, but what the hell is happening now? How long, when we are almost, seemingly obsessed with images of death and in a variety of forms that are both the product of the imagination, but also very graphic, realistic. Uh, not representations, but presentations or displays of horrific deaths that become part of our world. Um, who was signifying and okay, not to try not to go on too long, but what in terms of the bigger framework to try to think through this really important question. I don't subscribe to the secularization theory, like that somehow this is a sign that people are less religious.
Oh, okay.
That this is a sign that the modern world no longer, includes people's religious lives, and that's pushed out. That's you know a characterization of the secularization theory, but that's some of it. Religions shrink in importance in the modern world, so that's part of the notion of secularization. Uh, but it's bullshit. I don't buy it, and I think, in fact, you can't escape religious aspects of human life. I think that gets me in trouble to some degree because I don't, um, I know, I know there are certainly people who identify as atheists, and I think that has a certain kind of meaning around it. But I also, from my perspective, think we're all religious, in ways we may not necessarily recognize, but we can't escape what it means to be human, and it's tied into, our body, these sort of existential questions around our body, aging, birth, death, how do I behave, what do I do with my body, social interactions, and so on. Um, so, it's hard to escape in any cultural setting. So, even as we think about the modern world and modern representations of death and what we make of the one framework I try to work within is not secularization, but de-Christianization, the ways in which Christianity no longer has a kind of stranglehold on the symbolism and meaning systems, around death, but instead that those meanings and how what sources we have to make sense of death and make, not just in an intellectual way, but also at this existential level, what happens when we die, what kinds of ethics and morals do we maintain around death, what are, our worst fears about death. Anyway, all that, was reconfigured in the more modern cultural setting. And, I mean, can generalize to some degree. I think two of the most important sources for this religious understanding and relationship with death, for sure, are science and popular culture. Those are very much providing a whole different religious network for great numbers of people in this modern world. Not that Christianity disappears, but it is much more of a mixed and competitive field. Um, so having said all that, I think that one thing that ties into how you were describing the more modern representations is the interconnections between violence and death as a sort of point of fixation in the imagination, and what people are, for whatever reason, drawn to. And so that, I think that, again, signifies a certain kind of sacred or religious valence that, that can have an impact on, how people think about their values and how they think about their aspirations, or how they satisfy certain kinds of urges and desires, things that are more primal that also, are hard to escape from in whatever historical context that we're in. So those are the kinds of things I kind of would start to try to dig at in that long answer.
Yeah. Well, I feel like these questions do deserve a long answer because it's a very complex and multifaceted topic, and everybody has a different take on it. And I feel purpose of this podcast is to show the different people, or the different people who work with death in any shape or form, whether it's a doctor or a veterinarian or a soldier or even you as a scholar, um, that everybody who does this work, it's important. And I feel like being not in the US and being not a student at Emory University, I sadly don't have access to these wonderful courses. But do you also teach for embalming, funeral home embalming, mortuary sciences, or no?
No, I don't. I haven't had that opportunity yet. I've given some talks at funeral directors conferences and various kinds of professional activities, but not so much at all. And I think they use or have used the books for sure to help give some historical perspective. Um, but no, I haven't.
Would you consider it if somebody asked you and said, "Hey, can my mortuary science student?"
Well, I doubt that'll happen. But yes, I would consider it. I don't close anything off.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. So also, with the U.S. having still the death penalty in effect, and it's apparently still being used in some cases, that people are being put to death by the justice system and by their peers of that justice system. How is that? How's the idea of such a deserved death of a criminal um, relevant to the society today in America, of course?
In America.
In America.
Last is when our whim she'll come out. You would know as a scholar, or so-called scholar. But yeah, I mean, this is a central question to think about in terms of death in America. Well, and religious cultures too. I mean, regardless of how the breakdown might be of whether Protestants support LDE or prestige. Um, something else over there. What percentage of Muslims accept and support the death penalty? It separate from all of that. There's a way in which what I would refer to as the religion of nationalism, kind of religious culture that is tied to our politics and thinking about um, how we understand national identity. That plays a role for sure in a certain kind of mentality that continues to think that justice can be served by uh, killing criminals or people found guilty. And on the on the one hand, you certainly and people have um, done all kinds of studies to demonstrate how um, the notion that capital punishment ensures justice uh, doesn't hold up. That in fact there have been a number of cases that where justice hasn't been served and mistakes have been made, or there innocent people have died, or something in the legal system hasn't who wasn't followed up through on. So separate from all of that is this whole kind of again sort of death obsessed culture that is tied to violence. And we find this in popular culture, but also very much in American, as I say, political culture, and what some people refer to as American civil religion. Um, there is, without question, a kind of, I don't know if I call it a cycle of violence, but a kind of pervasive thread of violence as a key aspect of American history, culture, and society. That certainly is tied into the abundant number of wars that
Yeah.
the U.S. has been involved in, but then also the kind of glorification of acts of violence and certain kinds of violent characters or whatever, like cowboys, like
Yeah.
African frontier. I mean, that's all very much if I can, and then think about slavery. I mean, there's just so much that you know it's hard not to think in different sort of metaphorical terms, but there is a way in which this violence and glorification of violence and almost a bloodthirstiness that signals something sacred and religious that's in this their DNA.
Yeah.
American society. And so capital punishment is one expression of that, I think, as it ties to um, whatever notions of uh, policing and justice and retribution and so on, which, again, in theory, one could have all kinds of different views, but in practice, it's clear that, capital punishment is without question tied into racism, tied into certain kinds of power structures that um, demonize marginal or non-whites, kind of white supremacy for sure. That it isn't part of that whole system. Um, but and finally, also I would say uh, there is also thinking about American culture and some of these religious aspects. Something of a we had a preoccupation with sacrifice. Certainly you can start thinking theologically about all of that, but there's a way in which, society, American society, feels certain individuals can be sacrificed. And that in that death, there's a kind of regeneration, a social regeneration that can take place. And I think that plays into a lot of the attitudes around um, the death penalty. The someone who deserves to die, is the attitude. But when we thrown out is sacrificed for society. And um, it's in that kind of exchange that the notion is something beneficial in terms of morality or social cohesion comes out of um, satisfying that kind of bloodthirstiness around. Again, around crimes that can certainly be horrific, but ties into as a society, what are our values, and what are our stated values that we like to place in terms of some kind of political rhetoric, but, at this more primal level, in terms of what we really love and what we continue to do, take drugs and,
That's sex.
rage and violence, have sex, I mean, yeah, and again, I'm not saying that's all bad or that's always all the same motivation, but it does seem to be themes of obsession, maybe not limited to America. It's usually worldwide, but the way they get played out in America is pretty telling and unique. And so certainly the death penalty reveals all kinds of crap about American society. And again, with American society that often claims to be pro-life, So there, all that needs to be deconstructed and really um, confronted, and I think to some degree, part of American history is um, the conflicts around these um, sacred topics. Again, it's not like there's no resistance or things haven't changed, but we are in um, a certain kind of religious social setting where heavily for sure uh, privileging Christianity in a variety of forms in terms of shaping people's morality as well as law. But you know, you certainly see opposition, and you certainly obviously have uh, a spectrum of views around the death penalty. It's not simply all Americans are supporting it.
No, no, of course not. No, and some have still have it legally, but they don't enact on it. It's just a question. I mean, back when Germany was occupied by the U.S., also we had these tribunals for all of these mass murderers and accomplices to the mass murderers during the Second World War, and they were also killed, and they were also hanged, and there was to some degree they were public, and uh, I myself am not judging these people because did they deserve to die? From their point of view, probably. I'm not one to judge. It's what's done, it's done. And so you also teach a course on death at university, and I assume as a student who wants to go to this class, what do they what do they how do they react to this topic? Because it can be quite personal, and it's like it's not your responsibility to be hand holding, saying, "Oh yeah, it's sad, but this is the course." So
Yes. Yeah. 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 But I've been teaching it just about every year for 30 years. It's a favorite. I still find it super fulfilling, and I definitely take young students in my class um, who are encountering this topic in a space that is different than other spaces in their lives, whether it's talking with their rabbi or their priest, or talking with their parents, or talking with friends or whatever about death. And this is like trying to create an intellectual space where it is primarily about the study of, and secondarily, and in ways I try to stay completely away from, also personal. People without question are going to be personally affected, or many students are. They're not very popular. I say that the first day. Very, very upfront about like what is happening here. But as you know, or might know, or feel, it's a great age. At least for me at Emory, most of my undergrads are in that age range of 18 to whatever, 22 or something. And that is the time, I think for a lot of for a lot of people when these thoughts are coming, and death is, and you're more aware of it to a certain degree, and you're becoming an adult where death becomes, very much through life in a more, for many people, more kind of frequent, regular way. Um, so I there's some degree to which I see what I'm doing as a vocation. I mean, I think it's a service, and I feel really great about it. And I've gotten really great responses to the class over the years, as I think any deaf and dying class, can be for any professor. So, but yeah, so they come in, and it's been great. I mean, one of the things quickly I'll say that I do that helps to throw them off in terms of what is this topic about, and how is this guy going to handle it, is a key part of my death and dying class is listening to music. So one of the things I do is, right early on in the semester, is I let students know. I say, I'm going to try to play a song to start every class
ah,
that is death related, in some way is related to death. And I said, I say, so I want you to be having an ear out for songs that have this theme. And I think initially they think this guy's a nut. No, what are we talking about? And then by the end of the class, it's clear that just about every song is about that, but there, so many songs out there to deal with the topic. And I do it to create the mood. I do it to sort of make the point that the study of religion um, requires you look at data across, from all kinds of different areas. So this is sort of data for the class to use to study or think about how people think about death. Um, and so it also helps, in that way to kind of break open uh, uh, possibilities of what counts in the study of religion. And then, and then of course, another reason is just to help make the point that I've been trying to say as well, which is religious life is very messy. It's very much a part of our everyday lives and not necessarily tied to institutions, but a part of our makeup. And so you can sort of tease out the ways in which we can see that in songs, whether it's the Beatles or, whether it is Little Nas X or whoever, it's just across the musical spectrum. And they, I mean, I know they love it. They do, they love it. And I think it helps to make the topic a little more like accessible and sort of open them up to the, wow,
Yeah, it's like an easy entry because you can just go home, listen to the music, and you're thinking about the topic. Um, and you said you've been teaching this for almost 30 years or over 30 years. So you had quite new generations and changing generations go through your class. Do you think the reactions have stayed the same? They changed? Um, is there some cultural, sociological impact that you personally have seen, even if it's just perceived?
yes, I have seen some of that over the years. And you do see, yeah, generational differences without question, of course. And that's interesting. But just some things that jump to mind when I think about this is one thing that has changed is that in every class I teach, I often kind of start off with getting students to think about the definition of religion. What is the definition of religion that they're coming into class? And up until, maybe 20 years ago or so, uh, most students who would be coming into my class would, without question, include God in their definition of what is religion. In the past 20 years, God has disappeared. God is not a kind of integral component, at least conceptually, it seems, of more recent students coming into the class who, same question being asked, well, how do you define religion? So I think that is aligned with some of the larger demographic shifts that are happening, as you no doubt know, but that we certainly see in America where, in terms of religious identity and affiliation, the fastest growing segment in America, and I think in most of the world, are the nuns. That is NONES, people who claim no religious identity when
Yeah.
it's not survey, right? So they won't say they're Protestant, they won't say they're Jewish, they won't say they're Hindu or whatever. They're saying I'm none.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so me personally, before I got married, I dropped out of church and I had to go to the church and say, "Hey, I don't wanna give you up to 16% of my earnings, um, as a church tax because I don't know where the money is going, and I don't trust you with it, that it's going to the causes that you claim it's going to be." And, of course, the entire scandals of Christian churches or even other people with other religions diddling kids.
Yes.
That's just
Right.
it's not a good look, right?
That's part of what's driving people out for sure. I mean, but it is clear that that sense of identity connection is diminishing, and more people are not claiming any religion. But that doesn't mean they're not religious. That's my take, and others.
Okay. So, would you say more spiritual, or is that too hippie?
More other than it's just regularly. I mean, is what often people refer to themselves as, which is I'm spiritual but not religious, and try to make a distinction between religion and its institutional forms and the kinds of issues you were just talking about, and a more free floating, disconnected spirituality. Again, that I think is where the action is for sure. And thinking about modern world and changes in people's religious lives. Um, so that. I anyways captured, to get back to the point, in some of how the patterns I see in students coming in. Um, Also, I would just say for sure, generally, and this is too is um, common, I think, for many, I mean, well, globally, but certainly in America, there's increasing numbers of students, undergraduates who are struggling with mental health issues that are very, however private and unknown they might have been previously. We are in a culture where that is very much kind of part of their identities,
Yeah.
or and kind of whatever sad part of some of the struggles for younger people. Um,
The same with sexuality and gender identity,
so much.
which is something I've gone been made aware of through uh, Jordan Peterson 10 years ago, and
Yes.
I didn't really understand it, and I still don't understand it. But
Yes.
it's like why he's so annoying in my eyes. He's very annoying. He's very not accepting. But I've seen a push from both sides. The people who want to associate more with it and want to say we need safe spaces in universities. And then the other parts who say, oh, we're very radical and we're very conservative. And so it's for me, the US seems like it's pulling in both directions at the very extreme. So is it also in depth of society or more of a restructuring of a society?
It is hard to say, but it's to go back to an earlier kind of question you asked. I don't think I even got back to, but the impact of social media on all of us. And thinking about death, because you were asking about that, Tom. I mean, but generally, in thinking religious life, drugs, mental health, that would just it looks bad. Sort of generally, but there are ways in which, as you were just saying, so in specific terms, social media is transforming the way in which we grieve. It is transforming in how we interact with the dead. It is, it's a very, I think, monumental uh, psychological and cultural force that, that I don't think we know exactly, what the results of this will be in the longer term. But part of it, certainly ties to death, but also ties to what we were just talking about, which is, um, some of the existential struggles that undergraduates are facing now, I think, and what's contributing to some of that.
Yeah. One last question because you just mentioned social media again. Do you feel like will we as a species will start uploading our conscious selves, if that's possible, or even everything we've written into AI or whatever we call AI right now? So you can question, for example, somebody's like, "Hey, grandma, tell me about how you lived in Germany in 2025," or whatever. Would that be something?
It's all happening. I think, I don't know, there are all kinds of developments in the ways in which AI, is becoming a factor, and how people manage their grief, or interact with the dead. And as I said, and so, you know, I have no idea. As a historian, I like to be evasive about a future alls. But certainly, yeah, I mean, it's happening now, and it's startling and discombobulating in ways that are potentially, awful, leading to chaos, but also potentially kind of a point of innovation, of recreation, and reimagining things, like how we understand death, and how we live with death. That might have, kind of more positive, I can't believe I'm going to say it, but more therapeutic kinds of potentialities. Um, And that's a comfortable space to be in, when it feels like we're in this, so much is in transition around the digital worlds of the now. So, but all these existential things aren't going to be um, untouched.
Yeah. Okay.
It's crazy time, and this is a great topic to have as a lens to be thinking about a lot of the craziness and the realities and the things we don't face and talk about.
Yeah. No, that's makes sense. So, any other last remarks?
Yes. No, I mean, it's never talking to you. It's great to have a chance to kind of run through some of this and think through it. So we could do it again.
Yeah, please.
Oh, how you can reach out to contact me. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. One moment. I'm gonna start recording now. Where is it? Haha.